Let me start by saying that this war is nowhere near over.
It's not.
Uh, the Russians have not fully mobilized. The first phases of the war, they only had 100,000 troops in theater. They have 8 million men aged 20 to 30 that can potentially be drafted. They have only to this point drafted about 300,000. And I expect by the time we get to May's kind of the date to watch.
The following discussion centers around the ongoing Ukraine-Russian conflict, geopolitical strategies, and the roles of various international players such as China, the United States, and NATO. The conversation takes a deep dive into the reasoning behind Russia's decision to wage war, despite the economic and diplomatic costs, as well as the potential future implications. Furthermore, it explores the intricacies of global strategies and the various interconnected elements that influence them, such as global finance, international relations, and even geographical considerations like soil conditions. Sanctions have been a key tool used by Western nations in response to Russia's actions. These have had a significant impact on the Russian economy and, as the discussion suggests, have influenced Russia's international financial strategies, including its dealings with China. It's also worth noting that the discussion mentions the potential for Russia to take further aggressive actions, including against NATO members like Poland. Lastly, the conversation highlights the importance of understanding geopolitics from a multi-phase perspective. This includes not just international relations and economies, but also geography, climate, and even local news sources. It emphasizes the need to constantly challenge one's understanding and seek out information that might contradict existing beliefs, a principle that holds true in any analytical or forecasting endeavor.
When the Ukraine war started and the sanctions kicked in, especially the financial sanctions, and the Russians lost all their euro, gold, and dollars that were stationed abroad, they then bought nearly $500 billion of yuan assets and were like thumbing their nose to the United States. See, we got other options. And then the day came that they needed to cash in some of those yuan assets to do things, and the Chinese like, no, that's all right. We don't want them back. And the Chinese discovered that they just lost $500 billion. So the Russians are just quietly now going back to euros and dollars on the black market because it's more reliable than dealing with the Chinese.
Jeez. Wow. Man. And so if you're Putin, I thought Putin would be pulling his hair out, but
he doesn't have any.
He doesn't have any hair. Good point. I was being metaphorical. I'm a very metaphorical person here. But I thought to myself, this Ukrainian war was a disaster. I don't see how Russia gets out of this without losing a lot of face. And I want to get your take on that. But if you're Putin, what keeps you up at night?
Well, if you're Putin, you're probably not getting a lot of sleep these days. A lot of things have gone wrong.
Yeah.
Let me start by saying that this war is nowhere near over.
It's not.
The Russians have not fully mobilized. The first phases of the war, they only had 100,000 troops in theater. They have 8 million men aged 20 to 30 that can potentially be drafted. They have only to this point drafted about 300,000. And I expect by the time we get to May's kind of the date to watch, because they have a mud season in Ukraine, which will be March and April, or just finished October and November, when the trees are pretty much bare, the ground has not frozen solid, and it's just murky, and you can't really do a lot of mobilized warfare in that sort of environment.
Dude, I gotta stop you. It's so nuts. It's your breadth of knowledge is so insane. You know everything from soil to I'm reading the book and I'm like, the guy knows everything about what the soil is and why there's ice over here at this time. I mean, I don't know how you keep all this in your head. It's the craziest shit. Where do you get your information? It's obviously not CNN or Fox. You know what I mean? I'm like, he knows everything. I know you're a global strategist, and I know that there are a lot of companies that hire you to kind of tell them what they should do and where they should go. You know, for me, it's like, hey, Peter, what should I invest in? That's what I want to know. But because your detail is insane. I mean, how do you have the time to figure this shit out? I mean, we'll get back to this in a second, but can you maybe give us this is such an unfair question, but where do you get your information? What are you reading? Who are you listening to? What books are you reading?
Every time we get a new client, we have to learn the world from their point of view.
Okay.
So if I have a client that grows soy in North Dakota, I have to learn the global soy market, and that takes me into Brazil, the geography and the finance of Brazilian development and what's going on in Ukraine and the third largest soy market. And then I go into finance, and then I go into manufacturing, then I go into transport. I've given probably about 800 presentations since I started doing this about 10 years ago. And then for the 12 years before that, I worked for a firm where I was the only generalist on staff. And it was my job to take all the specialist work and knit it together to show how it fit. You do this for 20 years.
It's such a unique talent, though, because it's always changing, and like it's just infinite. Again, it's like just people should read.
There's always another layer.
I mean, just on like your example of blue jeans, your example of how cobalt is a major player and who has cobalt. I mean, it's just, and so that just requires you to read what? How do you? I mean, where do you get your news?
I read everything is the short version. Back before I started doing this 10 years ago, the company that I was at had a really good open source monitoring system. Unfortunately, most global media has kind of gone since then. Yeah. So I still have the original list of all the local news sources around the world, and we just do a general sweep of them every few days to see what's new. We spend most of our time looking for things that prove us wrong. It's not neat as friendly to the ego, but it's a big time saver.
So back to Russia. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It just kind of blows my mind.
May is when you want to watch.
Yeah, May.
Because that'll be when mud season is over. So two things will have changed. Number one, the Ukrainians will have had the entire winter to deferred maintenance on all that Russian gear that they've captured, and they'll be bringing new hardware in from the West. At the same time, the Russians will probably have at least another 500,000 men that they've thrown into the war.
And Russian they're going to do it. They're not pulling it. They're not pulling back.
No. From the Russian point of view, the only thing that would be worse than not launching this war in the first place would be to launch it and fail, to pay all the prices for the conflict, but not get what they were after, which is a more securable.
What are they after? They're after a more secure border.
Right.
Can't they do that with guarantees? Can't Zelensky and his group just say, we swear to God, we're not going to join NATO, and we swear to God, we're not going to arm the border, and we swear to God, we're not going to be a nuclear power.
Yeah, Ukraine had said that as of January of this year, and you can see how seriously the Russians took it. Anytime people are talking about security guarantees for the Russians, you know that they've bought into the Russian propaganda. Keep in mind that when this war started, you already had several percentage of Ukraine's territory that was already under Russian occupation from the last war.
Crimea.
Yeah, Crimea, the Donbass. This is the 7th time that Putin has done this since 1999 in the former Soviet world. He's going to keep pushing until he gets to an outer perimeter that he thinks is more securable. Unfortunately, that includes parts of Romania and Poland.
Is this a romantic need to create the Soviet Union again? Is that what's going on?
I'm sure there's some of that, but that's not the primary issue. Russian territory is just really poor economically. It's some of the poorest land in the world for anything. And they've never had enough money to generate a road network. So what they do is they expand out until they reach zones that they can defend. Because think about Napoleon or Hitler. They rolled into the Russian interior, and it wasn't the Russians who defeated them, it was the weather.
Yeah, it was the winter.
The only way that the Russians have ever discovered that they can be safe is if they can plug the access points that allow countries to get into their space in the first place. That's Poland, that's Romania. So the question was never, will the Russians stop before they get all of Ukraine? No, it's like, what will they go for after they've taken all of Ukraine?
Do you think the Russians... Do you think the Russians would actually go from Ukraine and then into Poland?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, I know. There's never been any doubt in the Russian mind. This has always been the goal.
But Poland is a NATO member, yeah?
Yep. So there's a lot of details that have to be worked out between today and then, because obviously first they have to beat the Ukrainians. But
which
we
is
now
a big
know,
if, right? I mean,
it's in play. I can't predict where the war is going to go. The first year of every Russian war looks just like this one. It's a shit show.
Yeah.
And then the Russians throw 1 million men at it, and the math changes. We haven't had that change yet.
It's so awful. I can't believe we're talking about this in 2022. I mean, the poor Ukrainians. We're
going to see a lot more of this.
And we're going to see a lot more Ukrainian civilians dead, aren't we?
Yeah.
In conclusion, our deep dive today into the intricacies of geopolitics, specifically focusing the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict and the international implications, has shown us the complexity and the interconnected nature of global events. We've explored how everything from geography and climate to international finance and diplomacy play a role in shaping the geopolitical landscape. It's clear that situations like the Russia-Ukraine conflict can have wide-ranging impact that go beyond the borders of the countries directly involved. We've discussed the potential for further escalation in something that we need to keep a close eye on, specifically given the implications for NATO and global security. In this ever-changing world, it's crucial to stay informed and to understand the nuances behind the headline. As we've seen, this requires a broad perspective and a willingness to seek out a range of information sources, including those that might challenge our current understanding. By doing so, we can better appreciate the global forces at play, make more informed decisions, and play a more active role in the global conversation. So, I encourage you all to stay curious, stay informed, and continue to engage with these important issues. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the complex worlds of geopolitics. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss any updates. Until next time, this is World Money Matters, signing off, stay informed, and stay curious.